The woman felt as though she was trapped behind a crumbling wall. Every moment she was alone at home. Her husband had gone on a business trip for a few weeks. As she struggled with loneliness and silence, in her mind everything in the house, everything that was missing caused her more pain. Her husband had been traveling for work for years, but this time the distance felt different. Usually she knew everything was temporary and would get used to it. But this time there was a void, a deep unbearable emptiness, like a sob. She had always felt this emptiness when her husband wasn't home, but somehow she had managed to push it aside. Yet tonight, this emptiness was more pronounced than ever. The feeling of being lost inside her was as if a huge rock had been drawn into her, and nothing could comfort her. The walls of the house, which once made her feel safe, had now turned into a dark and cold prison. The night outside, dark as it was, could be felt inside the house. The woman was forced to confront her loneliness. For hours her hands had remained empty. Only the dim light of the TV accompanied her. Her husband, far away, might be struggling with the challenges his work brought, but her mind always wandered to him. As far as he had gone alone, there was another world waiting for him. But how much did this world feel like it belonged to her? Loneliness seeped into her more and more, turning her thoughts upside down. She realized that nothing was the same anymore. But then there was Buddy, breaking his loneliness in this house. Those faithful eyes mirrored the void within her. Some way, Buddy was a German shepherd who never came to her without his puppy dog. Isaac gazed, so faithful, yet trusting. Just with his eyes he could comfort her. And now something pinched inside, for it was as if he could feel the presence of a wound within. Buddy's presence gave her trust, yet dragged her into a dark void. She was not alone, but the feeling of being alone had entered every corner of her, like a kind of threat. With this feeling, the woman was left to her own devices, both in fear and peace. Once, if the husband were at home, these emotional voids would emerge, but comfort derived from him would soothe her soul, even a little. But alone, being able to spend time only with Buddy, everything became more complicated. At this moment, everything about Buddy's gaze added weight to each emptiness the woman felt. Even his eyes touched her deep. There was some sort of depth in his stare. It was as if those eyes understood something inside her soul. Buddy, faithful as ever, was always trying to stay near her. Sometimes the woman met this with annoyance. Other times she found comfort in the security his devoted eyes provided. But that comfort didn't seem like it could last long. The part in her started to stir funny. For an instant they looked into each other's eyes. In Buddy's were some dimensions. Never mind, she felt a complete faith in him. Still, that stare from those eyes seemed to reveal something else too. With every step that Buddy made closer toward her, an inexplicable restiveness rose within her, not merely from his look, but in each gesture of his body. The woman took a sip of wine. She had started questioning her own decisions. Loneliness, in a strange way, was intoxicating her. Buddy wasn't just offering her physical comfort. He was providing some form of emotional connection too. But this connection was bringing something darker than she had ever felt before. When she felt alone, did Buddy's loyalty actually trap her in some way? The woman paused, lost in these thoughts. Buddy sat in the corner of the room, his loyal eyes staring at her. His gaze seemed to carry meaning, as though he was looking into her soul. She could feel every movement, every glance of Buddy's so clearly. For a moment something shifted. While she felt safe, she also realized that she was in some sort of danger. Though Buddy's loyalty had earned her trust, at some point it was pushing boundaries. She couldn't tear her eyes away from Buddy, sitting in the corner. In that moment, she had to confront her loneliness and fears. The emptiness inside her grew, and Buddy's presence somehow intensified that void. Taking another sip of wine, She let these thoughts swirl around in her mind. As she turned her head, Buddy's eyes, like two lights looking into a dark void, penetrated her soul. She was walking on a thin line between trust and fear, tangled in a path where loneliness intertwined with both. The woman felt very much like she had a mystical bond between herself and her buddies, going in and out of every second. There was a sense of security and fear. They were connected on the one hand. The house escaped the loneliness, but at the same time, it struck a fear in a woman's heart. He leaned on her with batty honesty, attracting some of her considerable attention. Just as she poured the last of the wine into her glass, she covered her silence again, and the old clock leaning against the wall sticks to the rhythm of his mind. Her husband had been in the habit of traveling on business for years, but this time he had zero involvement. The liquor released the warm relief within him, but that resort was only a temporary refuge. Everything else stayed the same. He stayed beside her as a palm tree circled around him. Madly, the woman saw none of the separate tomorrows. After a while, she felt the cooling Buddy touch her hand. He looked at her and kissed her head. He tried to recognize his lonely solitude. How normal, how normal. How normal how he had always been comforted. But this time the sense of relief could be permanent, not temporary. The emptiness inside her seemed to grow by the second. While stroking Buddy's head, the woman suddenly got lost in a thought. Why is my husband so far away? While she wanted everything to continue, as it always had, it felt like something was changing. Her husband had been avoiding the demands of his work for a long time, but what the woman was feeling was taking on a different form. Each day, the wine's effect began to show, and a vaganese began to rise in her mind. Being alone in this house, the house she had always shared with her husband, held a different meaning now. Maybe this was the moment when feelings she had unconsciously suppressed for years were coming to the surface. When the woman looked into Buddy's usual loyal eyes, the tension inside her suddenly intensified. He was just a dog, but in that moment, there was something in Buddy's eyes. The woman felt compelled to search for meaning in them. Suddenly, the feeling inside her began to take on a different form. She was walking the fine line between fear and unease. "What do you feel, Buddy?" she whispered, though she knew she didn't want the answer. Buddy was just her dog, but at the same time, that dog could see her loneliness. In her dark world, she was always scared. Although she couldn't bring himself to trust Buddy fully, she thought of the time Buddy has been urging her, with his gaze never turning away. Even once he was into her soul till the very core. For a fatal moment, she just wished she could read his unspoken thoughts. It was weird for her to think about a dog whose gaze had left the most indelible mark on her. A chill spread through her heart. Now almost unable to stop looking at Buddy, the woman reached out again for her wine glass. Information fed by Buddy's eyes, that is whatever it was that he could not understand, floated like an island. She found herself oscillating between trust and fear, while trying to figure out that information. From his eyes, there seemed to be no sound in the room, and then, everything inside the woman was sucked right in. Buddy stood in the middle of all, echoes within the house. Then an urge to drown every curse as in good whiskey caught up the woman. With renewed hopefulness, she refilled her glass, paused for a moment, then decided to lose herself. The thoughts as quickly as she could. Yet flash drew in her eyes like a magnet, closing her thoughts with his gaze. That was the loyalty in the end, leading the woman down an end of the road she felt herself confined in. That damn dog stood right in the middle of that confining space. In an instant, her mind wandered to her husband. When would he come back? When would he bring warmth into the house? But of course, these were not the only thoughts in her head. Maybe nothing would have been different if her husband were here, but for now, they found themselves caught in a time when all was absent, also different. She had always felt that something was missing, but now deep down inside, There was a seeming to draw inside, and she considered Buddy. Inasmuch as everything was precariously sanguine, almost ineffable huge, scarily asterisk what was to be done. Asterisk swirled in the brain, intervals. Once even the wine seemed to make her at first relaxed, but its dark thoughts were, while finding their free play. Having still another sip, the woman turned foggy above her brain waves, and she made a step to Buddy. Yet somehow, this loss was parallel with something gained inside her heart, and an unseen thread formed in her insides. An idea of something, but what name this strange emotion? Asterisk loneliness. Asterisk fear. She took still another step near and bent to Buddy. In an instant, she suddenly noticed something else in the room. No matter how strongly she felt, something was slipping out of her control. With a sip of wine, something in her heart broke. Buddy's eyes carried a meaning she had never felt before. At this moment, all the uneasiness in the house flowed towards her. The gaze of a dog was pushing the inner boundaries of the woman to yield to his loyalty or to these mysterious feelings. Every time the woman felt Buddy's warm breath, a shiver ran through her body. Everything seemed to slip away. Her mind, clouded with wine, was full of complex thoughts. In that moment, she could feel that something had broken, that another step had been taken. She wanted to find peace in Buddy's eyes, but there was something else there, an intensity of feeling, that things were deeper than she had previously realized. He was just a dog, but why did she feel this emotion so intensely? Suddenly, as the woman felt her hand on Buddy's head, her dark thoughts became even more intense. Did this touch mean something? Was it just the loyal touch of a dog? Or was it something else? The woman took a deep breath and briefly closed her eyes. The fear of losing herself became clear in her winded mind. Yet at the same time, Buddy's warm gaze seemed to remind her of something. The woman, lost in loneliness, thought for a moment that she wasn't alone, but her feelings were pushing her toward one thing more. As the woman walked around Buddy, she paused for a moment. The emptiness inside her echoed in her wine-clotted mind. She felt as though she were at a dead end. Everything had become too fast, too complicated. Her husband was gone, but at that moment, Buddy seemed to have taken his place. Somehow, the curiosity that arose inside her transformed into something different. In those eyes, Buddy was offering her a closeness she had never felt before. He was just a dog, but there was something in his gaze. The woman moved even closer to Buddy. His loyalty, his trust, but the emotional emptiness inside her was pushing her to want more. For a moment, the woman thought of her husband. She thought about their relationship. The bond between them had always been deep and friendly. But at that moment, there was something lacking in that bond. When her husband wasn't there, Buddy's presence made her feel a kind of trust, but it felt different. Yet that trust lacked depth. As the woman stroked Buddy's head, she reflected on everything. The emptiness inside her only brought more confusion. The wine had made everything more uncertain. For a short time, the woman thought about her husband. He thinks about their relationship. The relationship between them was always deep and friendly. But at that time, there was nothing in that slavery. In the absence of her husband, she had a belief in Buddy, but she was unique. However, there was no deep confidence in him. When the woman embraced Buddy's head, she thought about everything, the inside of whom he had brought great doubts. The wine had done everything more than hands. Just as a criminal saw a woman's eyes, so there was something in that eye. That was when he took hold of his fear. What happened? Why was it so impressive? Why did he feel that way from the eyes of the dogs? He was lost in his fears and his joy to see things. The loneliness in him grew. Something felt like nothing. The woman was solemn. At that time, there was a lame in Mr. Baddest part. The loneliness was not just part of his emotions. He also had a picture of his inability to control. His fears were growing every minute. That woman felt she had been seriously involved in Batty. At that time, silence and loneliness joined him in his mind. Her husband was far away, but Buddy was there. However, they could not be sure. The woman took another step. He never forgets the evil one. At that point, time seems to be hindered, and everything seems to be near, like it was coming. What was this feeling? Fear, desire, cleanliness. For a moment, everything in the woman's mind became a blur. Why was she feeling this way? What was happening? Why could a dog affect her so much? She wanted to drink more, but this time, she could feel her heart racing instead of the wine. Every glance, every movement from Buddy was pulling her into a dead end. Did she want to lose herself? Loneliness had never felt so strong before. This was an emotion she had never expected. The woman never took her eyes off Buddy's. In that moment, she thought everything would reshape. The uncertainty she felt inside was making it harder to take another step. Yet she still carried the desire for things to slip out of control. Finding such death in the eyes of a dog was deepening the emotional chaos inside her. She felt like she couldn't hold herself back. At that point, she realized that everything was slipping away. The tension in my relationship with Buddy had been building over time. I was restless. My heart was racing with fear and sexual tension. Buddy's presence gave me comfort, but at the same time, it created a deep feeling of emptiness inside me. I thought there was a direction, a desire in his loyal gaze. This was both frightening and alluring, putting me in a kind of dilemma. On one hand, but his loyalty and unconditional love gave me peace. On the other hand, this deep connection triggered my uncertainties and fears. During the worst moments of loneliness, Buddy's every move became more defined. Were I there, Buddy followed me every step, gazed upon this relationship, pressed me into, draining my whole being into one deep pit of, glad to quote, trials of rising desperation. These very myriad of friendships, these proximity to which I drew, which gave me safety yet challenged my very existence. By day I would run for shadow from that surface sun and into Buddy's company, but nighttime, solitude would stretch till unbearably, agonizing ascension. Sometimes this desire reflects back in Buddy's eyes, sparking the worst of my longing. Terrifying sometimes, yet eyebrow-raising. Who am I? What do I desire? What are my boundaries? He has become my best friend, and simultaneously a challenge to my limits. His loyalty is sanctuary for this soul of mine, pressing its hand deeper and deeper into my very soul. With each passing moment in my everyday life, Buddy's following me sometimes feels like a relief. Other times it feels like a form of pressure. At home, on the street, at the park, he was always with me. This led me to question my sense of freedom. Was I free, or had a kind of dependency developed with Buddy's love? These thoughts keep me awake at night and pull me into constant inner conflict. During the day, every moment spent with him feels like I'm being drawn deeper into a more complex, emotional journey. This journey forces me to look inward, to define my emotions and desires more clearly. Buddy's love sometimes feels like a refuge, sometimes like a labyrinth. In this labyrinth, with each step I take, I discover my emotional boundaries, and sometimes experience the thrill of crossing those boundaries. I see my relationship with Buddy as more exclusive than between a human and a dog. As there grows an awareness of the inner journey and initiation, and I have been emotionally initiated. Having Buddy simply took over a space within me, allowing me to understand what contradictions reside within myself. And as I accept them, this layered relationship works wonders for the journey to myself. As each time, it sends me a bit closer to my exterior delimitations and unlimited potential. So defenseless on my part, Buddy soon broke open the softest parts of me, where I keep the darkest fears and desires hidden from myself, revealing them to me. The time spent with Buddy is often in play, while others seem purely like a fight, and sometimes just the unbroken silent gaze of my dog, so openly loyal and loving. brings me peace during my lowest moments. Those looks bear me witness and make me face up to myself. Every morning the gaze from Buddy, it is as though casting a haze over the day ahead of me. His presence makes me feel stronger, while a shadow falls on me. Throughout each act of his, there is unity in our souls, with me and Buddy feeling against, rather than for each other. Every movement of Buddy and every look fired at me turn up life's roller coaster of emotions, a slew of questions or dilemmas, giving way sometimes to deeper thoughts, but staying always inside. So I must miss many simple pleasures of that moment. This journey with Buddy pushes me to reconsider what it means to be human, to love, to connect, and to be independent. Every moment with him is a learning opportunity, a process of growth. In this process, sometimes I lose myself. Other times I find myself. Buddy's love takes me beyond my own limits. Through this love, I'm beginning to understand both myself and the world more clearly.